Okay.
I want to reach out from the grave.
Well, that definitely was not my intro. Everybody out in Radio Land listening, we're not going to have an intro today because when I pushed it, I didn't have it loaded, and it loaded the next thing that was in line. So, I guess, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Dr. Bob Curran, and we're going to discuss actually some on two of his books. One is A Haunted Mind about H.P. Lovecraft. He's going to go inside the dark and twisted world of H.P. Lovecraft. And the other one is American Vampires. And folks, pardon my voice. I'm suffering a little bit of weather right now. I hope for it to be better by the next show. Just kind of work with me and bear with me through this. We're going to probably discuss the American Vampires a little bit more than H.P. Lovecraft. And I say we go ahead and kind of dive right into this. I'm starting a little bit out behind because I wasn't expecting to go quite this route, and I didn't expect my intro to be unloaded. I kind of messed it up myself. Bob, I got to tell you, it's great to have you back on my show. I hope you had a great holiday season.
Royce, a very happy new year to both yourself, your family, and all your listeners. It's great to be back, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. I hope that your throat clears up, and if you want, try a bit of honey and lemon, or if you don't have that, a bit of bootleg whiskey. That'll either cure you or leave you that you don't care what you sound like.
Well, that really sounds like you have some fun out of it. Okay. I'll look into that. Actually, it's what you're describing.
I think you should.
What you're describing sounds like a hot toddy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Or several hot toddies.
I'm definitely looking at that. Little Wild Turkey 101 mixed with a little honey and what else? Hot water?
Hot water, squeeze a lemon. Works every time.
Gotcha. Alrighty. My wife knows how to make those. Bob, about the one on H.P. Lovecraft.
Okay.
So, you've done this one a little bit here a while back, didn't you?
Sorry?
I said you did the one about H.P. Lovecraft here a while back, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Career Press asked me to do something on H.P. Lovecraft. And we took a look from a slightly different angle because one of the questions that was frequently asked, and I see you ask it on your headings for the show, that did he have access to some sort of secret folklore which is denied to other PR, hidden texts which are denied to some other people. So what we did was we began to look at some of the folklore which he might have had access to. Now, personally, I don't think that he had access to all sorts of weird and wonderful books, which none of the rest of us have access to. But I think he was well aware of some of the folklore and some of the bits and pieces of old texts, because his grandfather, Whipple Phillips, who lived in Providence, had a library, which the young Howard Philip Lovecraft, as he was growing up, had access to. So he was familiar with possibly Greek, Roman, and possibly some Arabic myth. And these influenced some of the stories which he wrote.
So his father wrote as well.
He had access to also a number of strands of mythology. So we begin to look at some of the mythologies he looked at. However, Lovecraft himself was, I could say, a rather strange individual. He always considered himself to be an outsider, and perhaps this has given the idea that he had access to certain knowledge which lay outside the normal field of human experience.
Yeah, and you were writing about the fact in the book that he did have access to certainly some tomes, but not as many as, say, some people might think he might have.
Well, we don't know actually what was in his on the full extent of the books that was in his grandfather's library, but we do know that he looked at Greek and Roman. So we looked at some of the Greek and Roman things that he looked at. For example, the idea of the god Nodens, who appears in certain Roman texts and in certain Roman inscriptions. For instance, in some places in England, there are some of the ruins which were visited by Lovecraft. Never visited these himself, but he knew of people who had. For example, the writer Arthur Machen, whose work he impressed Lovecraft greatly, who had visited some of these places, and there were inscriptions to the god Nodens, who may well have been a variant of the sea god Poseidon, who was venerated by both the ancient Greeks and as Neptune by the ancient Romans. We know that he had read books possibly on the notion of the jinn, the Arab sort of spirits who lived in the West and who had been contacted by people known as Kahins, Kahins, who were sort of like soothsayers and who dealt with the jinn and who were sometimes driven mad by the jinn, by their contact, because the jinn were very, very alien. The jinn, as I say, were spirits who lived in places like Wadi Rum in southern Jordan or down on the Yemen coastline in the Gulf of Arabia. And this may have translated into something, let's say, like Abdul al-Hazarad, the mad Arab who had come from Sana'a in Yemen and who had visited the nameless city, Iram, of the Pillars. Now, certainly he would have possibly read about Solomon, who had quelled the jinn, or had made the who had subdued the jinn and took over their city. The jinn were supposed to have built a great city down in southern Jordan, which is now the site of the Valley of the Moon at Wadi Rum, down from the Gulf of Arabia. So he would have known about these and have put them into some of his stories, and possibly this is the site of Iram, the city of the Pillars, which may have been based on an actual city which vanished in I think it was about the 12th century. It was on the frankincense trail, and it was known as Ubar. But it simply fell into a hole in the ground. It was built over a subterranean lake, which the inhabitants of the city used as a well. And as the water level went down, the roof of the subterranean lake on which the city was built became weak, and the city simply collapsed.
Wow.
But it became a great myth, the myth of the great trading city of Ubar, which had vanished. And that could have translated into Iram, and certainly Lovecraft knew about Wadi Rum and places like that in the Arabian desert. In fact, I think Lovecraft also adopted the name as a child in his play of Abdul al-Hazarad, though nobody knows where the name came from.
I kind of got the impression while I was reading the book that from your portrayal of Lovecraft and his motivations in his writings was that his writings was a reflection of kind of like his escape land from real life, life that he wouldn't say maybe the most pleased with in the world, and he'd kind of go to these other places and he'd write about them, sort of like, did I kind of misinterpret that?
No, you're quite right. As I said at the head of the program, from my personal perspective, Lovecraft may have been a rather weird individual or a rather strange individual. And I know that Lovecraft considered himself to be an outsider. For example, he didn't actually work apart from 1 week in his life. He may not have considered work for him, and he lived almost in penury. He also had a whole number of, I suspect, inner demons with which he wrestled from time to time. For instance, he didn't consider himself particularly good-looking, although he was quite passable. But he didn't consider himself sort of good-looking. And therefore, all these things, this translates itself into sort of monstrous figures in his writings. He also struggled with the notion of madness and was terrified of becoming mad. Both his mother and father had died in a sanitarium. His father had actually been mad. We suspect that it was through a form of syphilis.
So there was some history of mental history through his family tree.
There was. And I think that Lovecraft himself was terrified of being mad and considered himself at various times on the edge of madness. We do know that from time to time he contemplated suicide, going so far as to carry a small bottle of poison around with him.
Yeah, I read that in the book.
So he may well have suffered from great periods of depression and periods of great uncertainty about himself, and that's the sort of demons that he was wrestling with. And those are the sort of demons that he was putting into his books, because there's a current theme, underlying theme in many of his stories about an underlying madness within some of his characters, and the fear of madness, and people who had been mad, who had lived in various places. And if you look at some of the places he created, for example, Dunwich, for example, Innsmouth, which some claim that he based on real places, and I would not doubt that there were various reclusive and inbred communities living in the late 1800s and beginning of the late 1900s and beginning of the 20th century in places like New England. But he was terrified of this madness, and this translates into some of the places that he wrote about, with sort of inbred communities, old people in the community who were considered mad or crazy or something like that. And this reflects something of the fears that he had and the things that terrified himself and the demons that he struggled with.
Yeah, I'm sitting here listening to you, and I read the book, and the thought occurs to me that he might have suffered a similar fate to his parents if it had not been for his writing.
He could well have been, and I think he did find, and this is open to interpretation, of course, he did find normal human relationships slightly difficult. So that considering himself an outsider, he had a great deal of acquaintances with whom he communicated by voluminous letters. Some of these letters reaching almost 100 pages, which he sent out. But he seems to have only on certain occasions, and he was by no means, I don't think, a recluse, but he did venture out, and he ventured to various places. He never ventured outside the United States, but he found it very difficult to go into new places, new and modern places, when he lived for a while in New York with his wife, because he did marry, although the marriage broke down. He lived in New York. He found New York incredibly oppressive. He found New York full of strange to him people. And he found it, and I don't want to labor the point too much, but he did find it full of foreigners, which he found their ways very strange and very, I suspect, very frightening, because he was unfamiliar with them. So you're quite right, Royce. Some of these things could have preyed very strongly on his mind, and might have actually from time, and he was certainly subject to fits of depression, in which he thought himself of very little worth, and it could have served to tip him over the point to where his, particularly his mother, who seems to have been a very highly strung and very nervous person, to where she.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression he was. He also seemed to be not exactly the kind of person that would win the Saint of the Year award.
I don't think so, but then there are people who say that he was a very pleasant person, and I have no reason to doubt that he could be good conversation and that he had a number of friends. But I still think, perhaps, and it reflects more on me than it does on him, that he was a very singular and very rather strange person. I think that if he and I had met up over the dinner table, I would have found him a wee bit difficult.
Yeah, but you're the kind of guy, from my knowledge, at least when I've known you, that you're very amiable. You get along with almost anybody, it seems like.
Well, yeah, I try my best. I have another side to me, Royce, where I have to work in the community. I do things for the Northern Ireland community and work in community. And you have to be like that. You have to, particularly in Northern Ireland, you have to get on with whoever sits across the table from you. So maybe he and I would have got on. I don't know.
I think you could have, but hey, it's one man's opinion.
Absolutely.
one of the things I was going to mention is you didn't just write about H.P. Lovecraft, and I want to move on here in a minute to the American Vampires. But before we do, I wanted to mention and let you tell us real quick about the fact that what you went into it, not only his background, but the background of some of the writings he either may or may not have had access to or may have been an influence. You mentioned a lot of forbidden works, and you got quite a history of his, a bunch of grimoires, in other words. Are these things that are hard to find nowadays?
Some of them are. If you could see where I'm sitting at the minute, Royce, you would see that all around me I have all sorts of books and stuff. My wife always says, if people call, don't bring them into your study, because you have all sorts of books there, and they might look at you very askance. Some of these are all sorts of things. I have stuff on werewolves. I have I have books on vampires. I have books on fairies. I have books.
Oh yeah.
Night creatures. I have books called Hostage to the Devil. I'm just looking across these sort of things. I have Abandoned Houses of Ireland. I have the ghost stories of M.R. James. I have Medieval Outlaws. I have real ghost spirits, real ghosts and restless spirits and haunted places. So there you are. That's the sort of stuff that's on my bookshelf. So some of them are, and I have old photostat papers here. So some of them are difficult to track down, and some of them I have got through interlibrary loans. And things like that. But what I've done is I've looked at some of these books, and I give at the start of the forbidden books, because you mentioned the forbidden books, a sort of thumbnail guide to grimoires and stuff like that. I have a number of grimoires sitting on witchcraft and magic in the Nordic Middle Ages and stuff like that, which deals with old. I have a copy of the Redskin book by Brimi Nicholson, the Bishop of Holar, who was the most evil man in Iceland, because I'm working in Iceland at the minute. So, yes, some of these are very hard to track down, and some of them I have, and some of them I've got through both university and through church loans and things like that.
Yeah, because I don't see those kind of books like you're referring to in your everyday library, for example.
Oh, yeah, you won't get them in the libraries. And if you go into some libraries, particularly here in Northern Ireland, if you ask them, you get very, very strange looks. So just be careful if you ask for them. You can sometimes get them through universities, but it depends. Some of the universities don't keep them in their collections.
So this is research into this area would be a little tricky.
Well, research could be a bit tricky. You can get pamphlets, and I've got a number of pamphlets. For example, we looked at some of the church things about Lovecraft, because there were a number of churchmen wrote about Lovecraft over the years.
Oh, I'm sure there was.
You shouldn't be reading them. Some people and some people claimed from the political end that he was a Nazi, or he had Aryan sympathies, and things like that, or that he was.
Well, they suspected he was Crowley's brother.
Quite frankly, I don't believe that I don't personally believe that he was a racist, or I think he had certain views on certain things. Nor do I believe that he was attached to political organization. But you get that, and you get pamphlets, so you have to take a look at them from time to time, and have a set of magazines here that look at some of his stuff. So, as I say, Royce, I've built those up over a whole number of years. So, and some of them are quite old. Bought some of them in second-hand bookshops, but you can build it up over the years. But it takes you to know what they're looking for, I suppose. But other people look at other things, and other people will have different views about Lovecraft and about vampires and about all sorts of other things.
Okay. Maggie in chat wanted me to ask you about the Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible, once owned by Queen Christina of Sweden, she thinks.
There was a codex. Yes, there are a number of codexes which have come out. I think there may have been. I'm not familiar with the codex that your listener refers to. I have a number of old codexes. For example, the Codex Hereticum, which is supposedly a facsimile of a codex which is held by the Vatican. Now, this is supposedly a book which is similar to the Malleus Maleficarum, which I have a copy somewhere, which was written in the late 15th century, around about 1484, by two inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacobus Springer, under the authority of Pope Innocent VIII, I think. But there have been a number of books which have come out, and there's the Codex Hereticum, there's the Devil's Bible, there's the Bible of Leipzig, or the Leipzig Bible, written in 1450, which is I'm just looking at it here, which deals with Solomon and makes references to various demons. It's an older Bible in the King James Authorized Version. You have Fidelio de Stampa's Satanae, which is produced about 1480. Which is about devils and things like that. So you have all these ancient codexes which exist. And although I'm not familiar with the specific one which you've referred to, there are a whole number of such things written either by churchmen or by political leaders for various political or religious agendas.
Okay. Now, I was going to say, why don't we move on to the American Vampires? But before we do, I meant to mention earlier that they want to know more about you. They can go to your blog at drbobcurran.blogspot.com, and he's got all his plans coming up, books, contact information, things you might need to know about him, sitting right there on his site. You can get his book at any Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or major bookseller. You can also click on it on my site. It'll take you right to Amazon where you can buy it. And I'll be there in my archives. I'll be moving it off the front page tomorrow, but I'll be replacing it with the one with the actual show in it.
That's fine. That's grand.
Okay. Hang on just 1 second. Also, for those of you that would like to call in and ask a question, the number is 832-632-7904. Please feel free. And about the American Vampires, I got to tell you, I had a lot of trouble putting this one down in particular. There's so much about the American Vampire that I did not know. And the only thing I really did know was that there was a legend that says that the Count Dracula got started with Vladimir, known as Vladimir the Impaler. And he was part of the Dagobert family. And it traced back to King Rovi.
That is true. you're looking at a sort of 15th century Wallachian nobleman. Now, Wallachia was a small country in Eastern Europe, which corresponds roughly to part of Romania today. And he was a Dracula, or Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler, was a voivode. That means a local ruler. The name Dracula, or Dracula, means son of the dragon, or little dragon. And it was an order of chivalry, which was given to Vlad's father. He was Vlad III. His father was Vlad II, and had been given it by a gentleman called John Hunyadi, who was the White Knight of the Holy Roman Empire, who had given him the Order of the Dragon. And Dracula became Dracula, or Little Dragon. But the novel itself actually is an Irish novel. It was written by an Irishman, Bram Stoker, and it deals actually with what was going on in Ireland. Dracula is a nobleman. You had problems with the nobility in Ireland at the time. There was the land question. Dracula has to sleep in his own soil, and that goes into Fintan Lawler's Irish Land for Irish People. And you had things about the suffrage of women, translates into Mina Harker, Lucy Westerna, and you had problems with, dare I say, Americans. And that translates into some of the American characters whose name escapes me at the minute, but he also appears. Now, what I argue is that the idea of the vampire always reflects the culture and the problems of the culture in which one finds themselves.
Right. And you did a good job of it, showing that in the different states in America.
That's right. And that's what I was coming on to say, Royce, because where else would you get such a broad spread of cultures and traditions as in America? And that's why I picked America, because you have, because over here in Northern Ireland, and I think in Britain as well, we tend to think of America as sort of almost New York, and places like that, or San Francisco, or places like that. But, you have a wide spread of cultures and traditions right across America. You have German, you have French, you have Spanish, you have Creole, you have all sorts of, you have Portuguese, you have all sorts of, sort of traditions and cultures and backgrounds all spread together. And these people have settled in America. You have also Native Americans, and all these have become sort of intertwined because all of these settlers and all of these Native Americans have had their own nightmares, which they have all brought with them or shared, and they have all become almost intertwined in a sort of rich tapestry. I'm glad you found it difficult to put the book down, because that, Royce, makes it all worthwhile.
Yeah, and for such a wide variety of places you got in here, and the different beliefs about each one, I noticed that many of these shared common themes or common threads, vampires, shapeshifters, witches, a lot of them had some of the same beliefs from state to state, even though they had some differences.
Well, that's true. They're both similar and different. We have come to think of vampires now through sort of modern media. As either, as we were talking about a few moments ago, as either a gaunt, pale-faced East European noble in a black cape, or else as an angst-ridden teenager at an American high school, because you've Twilight, you've Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you've people like that. But in actual fact, although there are similarities, there are also differences because the cultures have been different. So we can't just categorize them like that. For example, let's say, vampires in North Carolina are different to vampires in South Carolina. And that's because you have two different cultures. And in the North Carolina, in the uplands of North Carolina, you have, for example, the Scots-Irish who settled there. And they brought their own nightmares with them. For instance, they brought the idea, which I mentioned in the book, of the hungry well, where the well, you do not drink from the well drinks from you. And that is an old tradition from the Irish famine times. So whenever they came to settle in the uplands of North Carolina, they brought those traditions with them. South Carolina is different because the culture there is different, and the history is slightly different. The main export of South Carolina was rice. These were the times of the Rice Kings, and you've still the great rice plantations down there, in places like Wacomonac and places like Murrells Inlet in south of Charleston. So you have a slave culture there who was brought to tend the rice plantations, mainly from West Africa, from let's say from around about Angola. So you have what is then in that area the Gullah people. So you have the idea of vampires who are creatures which fly through the air and who can take off their skins and leave them and fly out as horrible things, and then come back and put on their skins and look just like you and me. In, for example, let's say New Mexico, you have vampires who are little more than balls of light. Now, one here, because of Spanish and Native American ideas, witchcraft and vampirism have become intertwined. And so the witch is a person who can remove their skins and become a ball of light, which can travel at a great speed, and through osmosis, it can, through something like osmosis, it can draw the living good out of a person and into itself, because not all vampires, as you know, drink blood. Some of them drink energy. Some of them can drink other human fluids, such as sweat and things like that. So,
yeah, I had a lady on my show once, a guest, that said she was a vampire, but she only drank energy.
Well, that is quite true. And there are some people who claim that they know people who, if you sit long enough with them in the same area, in the same room, let's say, or in close proximity to them anyway, you can get up from an encounter with them feeling tired and drained and things like that. Mind you, Royce, I know some people who are like that, who are just plain boring. And you get up and you feel drained and you feel bored and things like that. But yes, there is a belief, let's say, among the Native Americans that certain people can draw the good from you, or can draw the good from a family, even, things like that, and draw it into themselves and revitalize themselves in that way. So once again, you have that. You have exactly the same. For example, I mentioned in New York, where a house was built on an old Dutch burying ground, because we think of New York as an American place, but if you look sort of under the surface of New York society, you will find remnants of the old Dutch, because New York was originally New Amsterdam. But a patch on the floor of mold, which seemed to draw all the good of the house. And this was the patch of mold was in the cellar.
I remember reading about that in your book.
And it seemed to draw all the good out of the house, and so that there was no good in the house. And if we can return for 1 second to H.P. Lovecraft, that is the theme of one of his stories, The Shunned House, because he quite obviously had heard the same story and used it as the basis of one of his own tales.
I'm surprised they don't make a movie out of that, or at least a show or something.
Oh, I think we should. I think if you and I got together, Royce, we could put a movie together. I am quite sure we could.
There was one case in your book that stood out to me above and beyond the rest as not being just mere folklore, but having some actual body to it. I mean, you had a lot of stories in here about a lot of different states, and I'm really jumping from the front to the back, but I didn't want us to run out. I didn't want us to run out of time and miss this one, because the actual research, the documentation behind it, really kind of shows a strong case for there having, at least at one time, been vampires in America, and that was the very last chapter, I believe it was, about these little dwarves that were living in the, what do you call them, pueblos, or?
In the pueblo, yeah, absolutely. And you get them in places like Wyoming. And if you're talking about the last chapter, actually the last chapter deals with Wyoming. Well, I am not long back from Wyoming. I was in Wyoming in November. I was in Cheyenne and around that area. But yes, there are stories of dwarves and of amongst certain Indian tribes. For example, once again, the Cherokee, who talk about the Nunahee, who are small men. But going back into history, you look at Coronado's expedition into parts of Kansas, which were his cattle were attacked by little men who appeared late at night. So there may well be little men living away in the wilds, another species of human being who may attack cattle, who may attack goats, who may even attack humans. They may be lurking under the balls of North Carolina or under the mountains in Wyoming and Nebraska.
It was Wyoming, by the way.
It was, yeah. There are still stories of little men who may drink blood. As talked among the Cherokee, the Indian peoples. I was up around about listening to stories from the two nations, the Shoshone and the Arapaho, and they actually talked about little men who lived under some of the hills in northern Wyoming and into Colorado. So you never know what's living in the deep gorges and distant trails of the Old West.
Oh, that's definitely true. And one of the things that got me about this chapter is you wrote about how these bodies were found in caves by explorers later on, and they were actually found to be a form of human, but not exactly like us. I mean, automatically they were dwarfs and, had different features, but still humanoid, in other words.
Well, if you look and if you believe in evolution, Royce, some people don't, but if you believe in evolution, you will realize that evolution has taken all sorts of weird twists and turns along the way. For example, we look at ourselves as Homo sapiens, and we look at ourselves as the only form of human on the planet. But in times past, we have not been, because there have been other branches of humans who have lived on the planet. For instance, there have been Neanderthals, who were very like us, but of a different class of mankind. Not so long ago, in 2004, 2005, whenever they were working in the Far East, they discovered the bones of tiny humanoids, which they christened hobbits, which may fit in well with Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. But there may well have been other forms of humanoid and other forms which did not act exactly as we do, and who had sorts of needs very different to ours, one of which may have been the need to drink blood, or not, they may have had low iron in their bodies, and they may have felt the need to drink blood or something like that. So it may be the basis for the idea of blood-drinking fairies or little men who lived in the mountains of Wyoming. It may well have been the basis for the idea of the chupacabra, which I believe is down in your part of the world, the goat suckers, and things like that. So we do not know what way we have been in the past and what sort of different sorts of humans have existed.
That is most definitely true. Nor do we know of their, any abilities they may have had, disabilities they may have had, or what happened before we were here. We have little knowledge of, other than the bones we find.
Well, that is quite true. And some of the ideas of fairies and little men may have come from different races who had different skills, perhaps through healing skills, perhaps through poisons, perhaps through the way in which they conducted themselves and lived their lives. We literally don't know too much about them, except that they may well have existed. And but I think we may be able to touch on race memories of them through myths, through stories, and through traditions, which have come down to us.
Right.
I think, for example, in my own part of the world, in Ireland, about the fairies, that may be part of a race memory of other people who have lived perhaps well away from ourselves, who may have been slightly smaller, who may have had different ways about them, and who may, as I say, have had different skills and abilities which we may not have. I still think that things like the abominable snowman or the Yeti or whatever you want to call them living in the high Himalayas may be yet another branch of humankind. And there are stories of men who live away in the remote jungles and who have been put down as great apes, but may be indeed be another branch of humankind. There's very little between ourselves and chimpanzees. So we need to approach these stories and say what lies behind them. And I think that's what I try to do with the American Vampire.
I think you did a good job of that, in my opinion. I really do. And you covered a lot of stuff. I meant to ask you, did you actually go to any of these places in person and talk to the,
Oh, yes. I have been, I was in New York, I was in the Old West. Not only was I writing about vampires, but I was looking at outlaws and things like that, which has always fascinated me. I have been to a number of places. We traveled to New York. For a while I was in Louisiana, and so I gathered together some of the traditions, and I keep a whole number of files, Royce, which I go into from time to time, and use some of the stuff as the basis of the chapters of the books. So yes, I was in some of the places. Other places I did read about. Some of the places I haven't been. I've been to North Carolina. I haven't been up as far. I haven't actually been to Massachusetts. I've been to New York. I've been to North Carolina, and I've been very briefly in South Carolina. And I've been to Vermont. So I've been to some of the places. Other places I've read about or have talked to people who have been there and put my book together from that.
Okay. Well, one more thing I wanted to mention before we call the show a wrap here is that as far as vampires go, even back in the earliest writings of the Bible, way back in Genesis, God condemned, drinking of blood and, this sort of activity. It would indicate that whether vampires are human or not, which if they were speaking our language, they could have been human. There was a species of human or non-human, whichever, that even back then would suck the blood from you or drain it and drink it or, whatever the case may be.
Oh yes, there was.
No need
the old books, which are what I call non-canonical books, refer to things like the creatures who were related to the Nephilim. The Nephilim were the children of the daughters of men and the fallen angels or watchers. Who had come down under some jaza and mated with the daughters of men and had produced a legion of monsters and creatures. Sorry, you were going to say something there, Royce?
No, I was saying that they were also flesh eaters, but the whole point being some of their descendants could still be lurking around today.
Absolutely. You never know what is out there in the night and what might be waiting for us out there in the new year.
Maggie was asking if Lilith could have been a vampire. Lilith.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Maggie was asking if Lilith might have been a vampire. Lilith of Jewish lore?
Oh, the Lilith. Sorry, yes. Sorry, I didn't hear you. The name. Yes, there was all sorts of creatures which came in the night. Lilith was supposed to be the mother of all demons, but she was certainly one who drew energy from you, and therefore should be classed as a vampire, because, as I say, not all vampires drink blood. Some of them draw energy, and certainly Lilith was a vampire or a monster of sorts.
Yeah, I know they had talismans against her, and I misunderstood. Her real question was she a giant? I'm sorry.
Oh, a giant. She could well have been, because the Nephilim in Jewish folklore were supposed to be were giants. They were destroyed, or many of them were supposedly destroyed by God or Yahweh whenever he sent the flood to cleanse the world. But I suspect that it was believed that many of them had existed, or some of them had survived the flood. For example, Goliath of Gath was slain by David, was supposed to be descended from the Nephilim.
Oh, the Bible even records that they did survive the flood.
Absolutely. They're mentioned in the Bible. So Goliath is supposed to have had 6 fingers and 6 toes, as did his brothers. So there's all sorts of creatures lurking about, even in biblical lore.
That is true. And in extra biblical lore, like you mentioned before, even like the Book of Jashur has mentions of stuff of this nature.
Absolutely. And as I say, there's a whole number of non-canonical books, such as the Book of Enoch and the Book of the Watchers and books like that. I think I might do a book on that at some stage. And we'll look at some of the biblical terrors. It could be called Holy Terrors.
Well, I show we got like 4 minutes remaining. Do you have any last minute thoughts you'd like to throw in there?
One of the things which I enjoy doing, and I really am glad that you enjoyed reading the book, because American Vampires started off as a very speculative thing I was sort of doing, because one of the things which had fascinated me was a story from which I had heard from a man from Tennessee, who had told me about a vampire chair, and that fascinated me. So I looked that up, and as I say, I have, in fact, sitting in front of me, of a whole heap of files which are piled up against the wall here, in which I have all sorts of ideas and notes and stuff, which have possibly for future books. So I started that off, and then I had written about this on the blog, and Career, whenever we were doing another thing, Career got in contact with me and said, well, what are you doing? Who are you doing American Vampires for? And I said, well, look, it's yours if you want it. So they said, go ahead with it. So that was the book. But the vampire chair fascinated me, and the more I looked through my notes, I saw that there was the basis of a book there, and you're sitting with the thoughts, my thoughts at the time, in front of you.
And those are the thoughts inside the book?
Sorry?
I say, oh, okay. I thought you were saying I was sitting with those thoughts in front of me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that was how the book came about. And we're thinking of other things. I happened to mention when I was in the States and meeting with the publishers that I had worked as a snake charmer many years ago in Morocco. So they said, would you be prepared to write a book on that sort of thing? So we're looking at the moment at a new book on things which have been the explanations behind some of the stories that we're doing, because I revealed to them how to charm snakes, because I was taught by the Gali men in outside a place called Sila in northern Morocco, and among whom I lived for a short time. So that might be the next book.
Okay, well, I'll be looking forward to having you on here to talk about it, and hopefully my voice will be cleared up by then.
Well, I hope, and think about a bottle of bootleg whiskey for the new year.
I'll definitely look into that. And in the meantime,
I don't know whether you would have bootleg whiskey down where you are. I don't know. We certainly have
bootleg, but I can still get some wild turkey.
I think wild turkey would be the very best.
Ready. Well, I guess in that case, I'm going to go ahead and call a wrap on this one. I want to have you back to talk about your next book when it comes out. I want to thank you for coming, and my guests are in the chat room thanking you for coming, and it's been a great show.
And it is always a pleasure to talk to you, Rice. Croaky or not, you're still a great host. Your throat clears up, and if you want, try a bit of honey and lemon, or if you don't have that, a bit of bootleg whiskey. That'll either cure you or leave you that you don't care what you sound like.
Well, that really sounds like you have some fun out of it. Okay. I'll look into that. Actually, it's what you're describing.
I think you should.
What you're describing sounds like a hot toddy.
Absolutely. Or several hot toddies.
I'm definitely looking at that. They little wild turkey 101 mixed with a little honey and what else? Hot water?
Hot water, squeeze a lemon. Works every time.
Gotcha. Alrighty. My wife knows how to make those. Bob, about the one on H.P. Lovecraft.
Okay.
You've done this one a little bit here a while back, didn't you?
Sorry?
I said you did the one about H.P. Lovecraft here a while back, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. Career Press asked me to do something on H.P. Lovecraft. And we took a look from a slightly different angle, because one of the questions that was frequently asked, and I see you ask it on your headings for the show, that did he have access to some sort of secret folklore which is denied to other PR? Perhaps this has given the idea that he had access to certain knowledge which lay outside the normal field of human experience.
Yeah, and you were writing about the fact in the book that he did have access to certainly some tomes, but not as many as, say, some people might think he might have. Well,
we don't know actually what was in his on the full extent of the books that was in his grandfather's library, but we do know that he looked at Greek and Roman. So we looked at some of the Greek and Roman things that he looked at. For example, the idea of the god Nodens, who appears in certain Roman texts and in certain Roman inscriptions. For instance, in some places in England, there are some of the ruins which were visited by Lovecraft. Never visited these himself, but he knew of people who had. For example, the writer Arthur Machen, whose work he impressed Lovecraft greatly, who had visited some of these places, and there were inscriptions to the god Nodens, who may well have been a variant of the sea god Poseidon, who was venerated by both the ancient Greeks and as Neptune by the ancient Romans. We know that he had read books possibly on the notion of the jinn, the Arab sort of spirits who lived in the West and who had been contacted by people known as Kahins, Kahins, who were sort of like soothsayers and who dealt with the jinn and who were sometimes driven mad by the jinn, by their contact because the jinn were very, very alien. The jinn, as I say, were spirits who lived in places like Wadi Rum in southern Jordan, or down on the Yemen coastline in the Gulf of Arabia. And this may have translated into something, let's say, like Abdul al-Hazarad, the mad Arab who had come from Sana'a in Yemen and who had visited the nameless city, Iram, of the Pillars. Now, certainly he would have possibly read about Solomon, who had quelled the jinn, or had made the who had subdued the jinn, and took over their city. The jinn were supposed to have built a great city down in southern Jordan, which is now the site of the Valley of the Moon at Wadi Rum. Down hidden texts which are denied to some other people. So what we did was we began to look at some of the folklore which he might have had access to. Now, personally, I don't think that he had access to all sorts of weird and wonderful books which none of the rest of us have access to. But I think he was well aware of some of the folklore and some of the bits and pieces of old texts, because his grandfather, Whipple Phillips, who lived in Providence, had a library which the young Howard Philip Lovecraft, as he was growing up, had access to. So he was familiar with possibly Greek, Roman, and possibly some Arabic myth. And these influenced some of the stories which he wrote.
So his father wrote as well.
He had access to also a number of strands of mythology. So we begin to look at some of the mythologies he looked at. However, Lovecraft himself was, I could say, a rather strange individual. He always considered himself to be an outsider. Okay.
I want to reach out from the grave.
Well, that definitely was not my intro. Everybody out in Radio Land listening, we're not going to have an intro today because when I pushed it, I didn't have it loaded, and it loaded the next thing that was in line. So, I guess, welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man, and joining me today is going to be Dr. Bob Curran, and we're going to discuss, actually, some on two of his books. One is A Haunted Mind, about H.P. Lovecraft. He's going to go inside the dark and twisted world of H.P. Lovecraft. And the other one is American Vampires. And folks, pardon my voice. I'm suffering a little bit of weather right now. I hope for it to be better by the next show. Just kind of work with me and bear with me through this. We're going to probably discuss the American Vampires a little bit more than H.P. Lovecraft. And I say we go ahead and kind of dive right into this. I'm starting a little bit out behind because I wasn't expecting to go quite this route, and I didn't expect my intro to be unloaded. I kind of messed it up myself. Bob, I got to tell you, it's great to have you back on my show. I hope you had a great holiday season.
Royce, a very happy new year to both yourself, your family, and all your listeners. It's great to be back, and I'm looking forward to talking to you. I hope that